Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the Aspen Avionics and Trio Avionics webinar. My name is Perry Coyne, and I'm the Director of Marketing Operations for Aspen Avionics. Today, hosting our webinar is James Buck. James is our Director of Flight Operations for Aspen Avionics, and from Trio Avionics / the STC Group is Jeff Odom, who's the Managing Director and Sales Manager. Just before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. This webinar will be recorded and posted in our Evolution video library on Aspen's website. There is a graphic with a link that will take you to the several videos, including this one. I will also send out an email to all those who have registered for this webinar with a link later. In an effort to get to all of your questions, please submit them through the Q&A icon, which should be at the bottom of the Zoom client. Please do not submit your questions through the chat feature. Mike from Aspen Avionics and AJ from Trio will be answering your questions throughout the webinar and will revisit and restate them for the benefit of the entire group during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. With that, I'm going to toss it over to James Buck. James?
Thanks, Perry. Appreciate that. Good evening, everyone. I'm James Buck with Aspen Avionics. As Perry mentioned, I'm the Director of Flight Operations here. I'm also one of two test pilots here we have on staff. And helping me out or joining me tonight is Mr. Jeff Odom of the STC Group. But before I get started into the meat of this, I really want to focus, on this very first slide. This very first slide is important to think about. So some of you may think or may have been advised that in order for all the avionics in your panel to work together, they need to be all from the same manufacturer. I'm here to tell you that's simply not the truth. Unless you're upgrading like a Cessna Citation, it would make sense to go with a complete Rockwell Collins or Honeywell system. But in the general aviation market, the majority of the manufacturers work really hard to integrate with each other to provide customers with seamlessly integrated avionics solutions. In the case of this panel here, the centerpiece, of course, is that Trio autopilot in the center of the stack, working seamlessly with the Avidyne GPS system on the right and paired with the 2000 Max system on the left. So here's a perfect solution. If you don't know Fly with Bruno, I really recommend you follow him. But this is Fly with Bruno's panel, and this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about: integrated avionics across multiple companies. And I made a joke about this in my last webinar over the summer, that you're the PIC of your aircraft when you're flying. You don't relinquish your pilot command authority when you go to the avionics shop. So make sure you understand what's available, what you can or can't do with your avionics system, and make sure you make the best solution for you. Jeff, if you would take us to the topic slide. Okay, so the way this is going to work tonight, I'm going to start off and I'll talk about the Aspen and Trio integration. Then Jeff will take over, go through a typical IFR flight from run up to approach in great detail for you. After that, Jeff is going to go some built-in safety features of the Trio autopilot, which actually for the low cost of the system are truly amazing. And after that, I'll pick back up and go over current promotions and contact information. And of course, as Perry mentioned, we'll close out with a Q&A session. And as Perry mentioned, Mike and AJ are standing by. Make sure you use the Q&A section for your questions. And at the end, they'll let us know which ones they couldn't get to, or if there's some common ones that came up several times, we'll jump in and help you get those answered. Take me to the integration slide, please, Jeff. There we go. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, Aspen, Trio, and the STC Group have been working on this integration for a few years now. Of course, Aspen and Trio, we are the manufacturers. Aspen makes the displays, Trio makes the autopilot. And the STC Group does, as their name implies, they do all the heavy lifting with the FAA to get the certification for the integration between these two companies. And they actually just had this approved. This was just approved right before Oshkosh earlier this year. So the features you get with the Aspen and Trio combination, first one is the heading control. So when you use the heading bug on the Aspen display, that commands the autopilot which heading to fly. Same thing with course. So whenever you set the course, and in the Aspen, you can set the course manually or auto course, and Jeff's going to talk about both of those. But either way you do it, it's going to command it, the Trio autopilot will fly it. The really, really neat thing for an autopilot this price range is altitude pre-select. So whatever altitude you bug in the Aspen display, whether in the climb or descent, the Trio autopilot is going to capture it. That's a really, really great feature. The Trio also has some auto sensing, auto configuration for on-nav approaches that Jeff will go into detail as well. It's very important to note for this integration to work with these features, the Aspen display has to be either a Pro Max or an E5 that's running software version 2.12. So if you have one of our early E5s, that unit may need to come back for a factory update and then have the software update at the same time. Check with your dealers. If you're going to do this upgrade and you have an E5 currently, just check with your dealer. They'll contact our field service guys. They'll give them the serial number of the unit and they'll tell you whether it has to come back or not. And not a big deal because that can be done while your autopilot's being installed. If you have a legacy Aspen Pro PFD, that unit will have to be traded in for a Max system. And we have a really, really great Max trade-in programs, which you get a really, really good trade-in value for your old display. So whether you're an existing Aspen customer without an autopilot, or you're an existing Trio customer without a PFD, or you're starting from scratch, we're really going to have you covered. With that, Jeff, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Thanks, James. So my name is Jeffrey Odom. I'm a managing member of the STC Group LLC. We do all the certification for the Trio autopilot. The Trio autopilot was designed by a gentleman named Chuck Bush, and an interesting thing to note is Chuck is still involved to this day. I just got off the phone with him, and so he knows this system in detail. This system was not this system in particular, but the original system was designed about 20 years ago. And we're here tonight to tell you about the Aspen integration, which I'm very excited about. Aspen's been a pleasure to work with. You know, basically whatever we asked them for, they provided, which is a beautiful thing, because that shows what the future holds with this particular integration. I do want to touch on something James said. If you have an older Pro Max software version, that's no problem. You just update easily to 2.12. But even if you have an older E5 that needs to go to 2.12 through the Aspen process, that you could still use that with the autopilot. So we have something called the compatibility list on our website, and it won't give you as much. 2.12 gives you the most, but we certified to a couple software versions back. So if you don't quite want to update your E5 at this time, you could still use the basic functionality, and all that's outlined in our approved installation manual. So I'm going to go over run up here some general things, and I want to say, if you're an existing customer, we do appreciate you, and if you're looking at our system or an Aspen, we hope you learned something, and just let us know if you have any further questions. So basically what we're going to do is, prior to taxi, we're going to power on the autopilot with the source select switch in GPS mode. Now there does have to be a source select switch. I get asked almost daily if you still need a switch, even if you have the Pro Max, which passes through all of the AirInc labels. And the answer is yes. Our autopilot is a triple redundant system. If we lose our EFIS, the autopilot actually don't have to set the switch, but that's a good way to force the data from the GPS into it. But if we lose the EFIS, it automatically bounces to our regular course mode. And if you don't have the update yet, or an Aspen, you know how that works. But you can flip the switch to GPS. It'll exclusively drive the autopilot with full functionality from the GPS itself. And then if you lose the GPS, the autopilot's still a wing leveler. And I actually have a guy in New Mexico area. He does mapping, and he loses his GPS every time in the same place for some reason. And he just uses it. He loves it because he just continues to drive it from the little heading command when you lose GPS. So it's a redundant system. I'm aware of other autopilots where if you lose your EFIS, you're done. But the autopilot, which I'll get into, is rate-based, so everything lives inside of it. So we're going to power up the autopilot with the source select switch and GPS. That allows all the AirInc information, all the RS-230 and 232 information to get to the autopilot. Now we can switch back to the EFIS once we're taxiing, and you have good GPS lock. The source select switch will not be installed if an approved EFIS is not installed and or connected to the autopilot. So that's important to note. We don't want people getting confused. You don't need the select switch unless you have an EFIS. And like I said, powering it up prior to taxi and prior to run up, or while you're taxiing prior to run up, allows the inertial rate sensors to bias. Number two is you'll enter the baro into the autopilot. And the cool thing about the Aspen is you basically press the baro button and you can slave over the baro straight from the Aspen. You don't have to set it to your altimeter anymore, which is very nice. It makes things nice and clean. If you don't have a flight plan, our autopilot will display no flight plan in the upper right display field. And if you have the source select switch to EFIS, it's just going to show your selected heading or your selected course in the top left field. Once you load a flight plan, it'll show flight plan information on the top right, so you can kind of keep track of where you're going on the autopilot. We'll skip through some of these. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to press the V mode button, and I'll go through this in the slides. But essentially, pressing the V mode button, which is the bottom right button on the autopilot, allows you to cycle through a couple different modes. Now, the autopilot, when you turn the servo on, it goes straight into altitude hold as long as nothing's programmed. The second screen, when you press it again, is airspeed and vertical speed. The third sequence is altitude select. And then the fourth one is elevation set or altitude set. It'll say elevation set on the ground. It'll say altitude set once it has pitot. We can kind of skip through some of this. So this is some of the basic, how to set it up, how to get all the signals talking when you're taxiing. So now we'll go here, which is important, the servo test. What we call out in the AFMS is to test the servos, to override them to make sure they're functioning properly. So we're going to center the controls. We're going to verify the top two buttons, which I'll point out later, are illuminated. We're going to use the control yoke to override the servo left and release. And it'll smoothly go back to center. Then we're going to go to the right and release, and it'll smoothly go back to the center. There should be no binding, no weird noises, stuff like that. Then we're going to go to pitch, and we're going to override the pitch servo about half to the pitch up position and release, and it should smoothly come back to center. And we're going to do it forward as well. So this checks out the servos. At this point, you would maybe test the disconnect switch. I think it's in the next test of the AFMS. Test the disconnect switch because that's the highest priority switch. Make sure that turns both servos off. So now we're on the ground and we're ready to set the Aspen up. What we're going to do is we're going to set the heading bug using this knob here to 090. As soon as you do that, you're going to see the trio read 090. That's your selected heading. Then this here enunciation says 220. That's our current heading. Okay. So your selection is red up top and your current heading is red on the bottom. Then we're going to go ahead and press this knob, and we're going to activate the altitude section, and we're going to go up to 9,000 feet. You wait three seconds, and the autopilot will automatically go to VS suspend 500 foot or your other preference set rate. It goes into suspend here because we don't have the servo on. And I'll talk about that, what we're going to do next. So basically, 500 feet, some people may say, well, I want to climb at 700. So how you set that up is you press this encoder and you scroll counterclockwise. It goes into something called preferences settings. And this number is adjustable depending on the airplane you fly. It comes shipped from Trio with 500 feet every single time. But this is selectable and it's adjustable on the fly. You can go 300, 700, whatever your location is and your situation is and your aircraft type, you can plug in whatever you want. So now we're going to get airborne and we're going to cross our 500-foot threshold, which will be placarded on the panel. That's our minimum engagement altitude. And we give you that placard to place on the panel. And we're going to turn on the servos. Once we do that, we're going to go to our selected heading, 090. So the aircraft's going to turn, and we're going to go to 9,000 feet at 500 foot a minute. So that's how you set things up. Now we're going to intercept a course to a fix. So we're flying along. Our heading's 210 in this case. So you see we've got a selected heading, 210. Everything matches here. And we're in a climb to 9,000 feet. What we're going to do is when we're ready to turn 240, this is a non-slaved situation. So you have, if you press menu here and you go to auto course enable or disable, this would be a disabled auto course situation. So you turn your course bug 2 degrees or more, and the Trio will automatically read that change here. So your selection is 240, and you're on a course of 210, and you're intercepting this course. Now we're going to go through en route climb setup. So we're at 9,000 feet. Let's say we finished our last climb, and this scenario is more detailed for you guys. What we're going to do is set the Aspen altitude bug to 11,000 feet, as you see here. The autopilot's going to read VS activate because we were just in altitude hold at 9,000 feet. The airspeed vertical speed light's going to be illuminated, and the altitude select light is going to be illuminated. As I said, the rate of climb is dependent on preference setting. So we're at 500. And it's adjustable on the fly. So say I want to go to 700, I take this knob and I rotate it. The vertical speed as of today does not come from the Aspen. It comes from the autopilot faceplate. So anytime you engage a climb or a descent, it automatically pops to this screen and you have to adjust this knob. Now what we're going to do is cycle through the V mode pages like I showed you in the AFMS on the first slide. So what we're going to do is during our climb, we're climbing, we're going to check that we're going to press the V mode button right here. And we're going to check that this value matches this value. And if you bug the Aspen to 11,000, the second page on the autopilot VNav side will show 11,000 feet. Then we're going to check our current altitude. So if you press V mode a second time, what you're going to see is your altitude. And you're going to see that it says 9,300 here and 9,300 here. So you can leave it on this screen to kind of have a second source of where you're going, or you can press this another time and it'll go back to your vertical speed. So that's how you kind of see what the autopilot's doing, and everything's all matched up for your climb or descent. Here we're at level off. So let's say we're at 10,800 in this scenario. Don't mind this bug here, but we're climbing to 11,000 feet. 200 feet before the selected altitude, the vertical speed will reduce to 200 feet. And that helps basically that helps the autopilot catch where you're going. When you reach your desired altitude, the autopilot will display alt captured and shift to altitude hold. So this screen here is going to be shown for 5 seconds, and this altitude hold light is going to be illuminated. One thing I'd like to mention about our specific system is we don't have auto trim. So it's helpful to press the PCS button momentarily when you get to where you're going. Get set for cruise, and then release the PCS button. You can also just disconnect this servo very quickly and get set up for cruise and then re-engage it. It really helps the autopilot not fight those trim changes. With that being said, I'd like to make another mention of these servos are independent of each other. So you can be flying on a selected course of 240, and if you need to make an altitude deviation, you can disconnect this. If you don't want to set up the autopilot to do it, if you need to do it very quickly, you can press this button and disconnect it. And you can also do it with the roll. Say you want to keep, 11,000 feet engaged, but you want to, you need to turn quickly. You can go ahead and disconnect this. Now, with that being said, the autopilot's very friendly in terms of how much torque, how much force it takes to overcome the servos. If you see a bird and you need to get out of the way, me and my partner Mark were just flying today, and a hawk was flying straight at us. He just took the yoke and turned. They're pretty friendly on how much force you put in. We have maximum values that we can put into the system, so they're pretty smooth, and they're non-stepper motors, so they're very, very, very smooth. Now we've got airspeed capture, which is a very big feature. A lot of airline guys really like this. So basically, what we're going to do here is I'll give you a situation where we're flying and we're climbing we set up a climb in the Aspen to 11,000 feet. We're at 9,500 feet. We want to switch to an airspeed climb. All you have to do is press and hold the PCS button, which will be on the left hand of the pilot's yoke, and you can hold it down. If you maintain over 200 feet a minute and let it go, the autopilot's going to enunciate, airspeed, and you can basically turn your encoder clockwise to increase your rate of climb, or decrease it to slow down. This is a nice feature, and it'll maintain whatever you selected in the Aspen and capture at 11, but instead of vertical speed, it'll just be airspeed. And there's more information on that in our manual on our website. Here we're going to demonstrate a slaved situation. So you're going to press this button on the Aspen. If you own an Aspen, you're probably familiar with it. But we're going to press menu and enable auto course. So we're flying on a heading of 270. Well, we're flying on 240, but we're selected 270 in this scenario. And you want to vector off the course. What you'll do is when you change your heading and you start flying away from your course, you can press H mode on the autopilot. It's the lower left button. And the autopilot will automatically go into intercept mode if you're a half mile or more away from your flight plan. And what that does is it automatically establishes an approximate 25-degree intercept. And that's adjustable on the fly as well. And what you're going to see is the lower light on the H mode side will illuminate. And when you get to your flight plan, it'll automatically switch to track mode. And I want to talk about track mode a little bit, especially with the Aspen. So track mode is just like it sounds. It just follows your magenta line. But with the Aspen, it's nice because all the GPSS stuff passes through the Aspen. So it'll be like if you're a previous customer of ours and you used to fly off an Avidyne or something like that, it'll be just like when you followed your flight plan. It'll have GPS steering, turn anticipation, all that passes straight through the Aspen. And when track is engaged, you'll see this LED, the top left LED on the lower right hand of the autopilot. Lower left hand side of the autopilot will be illuminated. So that's a really nice feature of the Aspen specifically. Everything passes through. You don't have to flip. There's another EFIS we have approved. You have to flip the switch a lot. Like when you're shooting an approach, you got to flip it to GPS on the source select switch. So the Aspen, you do not. The new E5 and the Pro Max with 2.11 or later, you don't have to flip any switches. It's a very smooth interface. Now we'll go through a en route descent. So we're going to we're going to plug in 8,000 feet again. If you're heading bugs engaged, you click this and we're going to rotate it counterclockwise. We're going to set it to 8,000 and the autopilot will automatically shift from altitude hold to a vertical speed, 500 foot a minute descent. And you'll see that right here. 200 foot before the selected altitude, the autopilot will reduce the rate of descent to 200 foot a minute, just like it does on the climbs, and it'll shift automatically to altitude hold. You don't have to press anything. So of course, climbs and descents are exactly the same. Now we'll go through the basic functionality of a LPV approach. Here we have Oxnard. And one thing about this is our autopilot, when you're shooting an approach, will show you, as you can see, Kukum here, we're 4.6 miles out. Here's Kukum on the chart. And it'll also show 17 foot. It'll show your deviation from the glide slope. And what this number is going to do is it basically puts you in ASVS mode and basically just follows the glide slope all the way to 500 foot. Now, that's another good point about our system. People ask me a lot, are you approved to minimums? No, we're approved to 500 feet. So you can shoot an RNAV approach to 500 feet. And if you need lower, there's other options, but that's where we're at now. We are, exploring some options, but 500 foot is good enough for the majority of our customers with what their mission is. It all depends on your personal mission. If you need minimums, we don't go down to all of them. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to have the trio in course mode. And like I showed you earlier, we're going to enter vectors from ATC in selected heading or selected course. When you get your vector to final, you can put the trio in track mode or intercept if it's a half mile away from the magenta line. And what you're going to see is, I'll go back, you're going to see this light start to blink, GPSV. When it's within a certain distance of that IAF, it's going to start to blink. And when it goes solid, that means you have glide slope. What you want to do is prepare to trim the aircraft because we don't have auto trim. It's not going to do everything for you and it adjust itself for different configurations. So that's the basics of shooting an approach. And there have been some questions I wanted to clarify. The way our AFMS was written in Rev B, it was kind of cloudy on exactly what we could do. And I want to assure you, even if you don't have an Aspen yet, go download the Rev C AFMS. It's very clear on instrument approaches and procedures, what we can do. And then for go around, you can use the autopilot for the lateral side of the go around. You have to turn off, this is it should say VNAV, but you have to turn off the VNAV servo and do the go around. And then for holds, increase power for published climb. You can turn the Aspen and use it for the altitude bug side. And then the trio will just perform the lateral side of the hold for you. Now I want to go to safety features. The autopilot has tons of stuff built in. I would say some features that other autopilots don't have. So first, we're going to go over the airspeed envelope protection. So from the factory, it's going to come set at 1.3 times your clean stall speed and 10 knots under VNE. So it calls it out in the AFMS, and basically what that's going to do for you is, say something happens to the PIC and the passenger is your wife who doesn't quite know, isn't up to speed or doesn't know how to fly. Basically, what this is going to do is buy you time. It'll basically keep the autopilot in an airspeed envelope till you run out of fuel. So if you start going too fast, it's going to nose you up. If you start going too slow, it's going to nudge you down. And it's very smooth. We test this stuff every time we do a new software change, of course, and it's very smooth. It's a nice feature, and it's a great safety feature. Then there's the auto servo disconnect on takeoff, which I really like. Basically, say we do our run up that I called out on the first slide, and we forgot to turn off the roll servo. When we take off, once you pass 40 knots, the servo is going to disconnect itself. And the signal is taken by the GPS ground speed and the pitot stat and the pitot. So if you left your cover on or something, then essentially it'll pull GPS ground speed. Now your GPS does have to be on, but there's two ways that it detects your ground speed, which is very nice because it'll disconnect itself on takeoff and won't allow any situations for like a pitch servo to be engaged with when you're trying to take off at 300 feet. The last thing you want is the autopilot taking over. Then we've got auto 180. So this is great for VFR and even IFR guys. And I'll give you a scenario. Say we're flying along at a selected heading of 180 at 5,000 feet. If you get into clouds and get disoriented, even if both servos are off, you can press and hold one of the top buttons, left or right, the servo buttons, for 3 seconds. It'll snapshot your heading or course, turn the vertical servo on in altitude hold, and do an automatic 180-degree turn. We've had people use it, and it's a very good feature, and I'm not aware of anybody else that has it. Then we've got straight and level recovery. This is called I think it's labeled AP RCVR or AP Recover. This button can go anywhere on the yoke. We usually put it on the right side of the radio stack, and for the passenger, but for the pilot as well if they need it. So basically, it does just what it sounds like. If you get in an unusual attitude, you can press and hold that button. Both servos will come on in altitude hold, and it'll straighten out the aircraft. We've got track offset position, and we've also got circle last waypoint. I want to talk about the control heads a little bit. The control heads, there's two different styles, and this one here is the most popular. It's called the instrument mount. And I wanted to mention also, if you guys are doing panel planning or anything like that, these drawings are available directly from me if you email me. It'll give you an idea. This is only 4.3 inches deep, about 0.6 pounds, very light. But this is 3 1/8. This just goes in a basic instrument hole. And then we've got the rack mount, which is 6.25 inches wide. And it's only 4.43 inches deep. It's very compact, and that's actually helped us. Like specifically on the Comanche, there's crossover cables behind the bottom of the radio rack, and the group, a part of the group that helped us was sure it wasn't going to work, but since it's so shallow, it fit just fine in the bottom of the rack. So these are pretty compact. They're really light, and I wanted to talk about the weight of our system in case you have an airplane that doesn't have a ton of useful load. Normally our systems, they all differ, but they're about 7 pounds total. So it's a very light system. The next one we're doing is a smaller aircraft, and we're trying to get it down to like 5.5 pounds total. So here's a couple questions about our company that I wanted to put out and answer for you guys. I get these often, so I wanted to talk about it. How long have we been around? Trio Avionics quietly celebrated their 20-year anniversary this year. The company was started by 3 gentlemen, a guy who worked on nuclear subs, Chuck, a brain surgeon, Sid, and a marketing guy, Jerry. And they started it 20 years ago, and they started it to provide themselves with a solution for their long easies. The STC group's been around since late 2016, and we've been around that long because the FAA then allowed our company and other companies to, through a policy-specific memorandum, to come into the certified world and start getting STCs. Warranty. So We have a 3-year warranty from the date of purchase. Unfortunately, it's not the date of installation. I will work with people and ship their system out, have Chuck ship everything out a week before they install. And some people want to get it early because avionics have had crazy lead times, and I'll talk about that. But it's 3 years from the date of shipment. And then after that, it's $250 to repair something. So if your servo breaks after 3.5 years, it's a $250 bench fee. It's a very, very friendly policy. A little bit about our servos. We designed them with a mechanical engineer who's also our manufacturer about 20 years ago. There's been minor changes to them, but they've been mostly the same for a very long time. They're non-stepper, brush DC motor servos. So they're smooth. And a lot of people like that about these. They're non-stepper. Actually, we had a P51 guy, or he was building maybe a P51, I think a T51. And he said, hey, I bought another one and they're stepper motors and they just kill the feel of my airplane. And I'm really interested in your guys' system because of how the servos are designed. So when our servos are off, you don't feel them. So auto trim, like I said, we do not have auto trim. We've been exploring options to add it to Cessna and Piper existing trim systems. We haven't got far with it yet, but we are talking about it because I've seen some other manufacturers do the same. VOR ILS, unfortunately, for now, this is a GPS-only autopilot, so it will not shoot an ILS approach at this time. And then minimums, and I'll also talk about maximums. Our minimum, like I said, is 500 feet AGL, and our maximum operating altitude is 20,000 feet. So there'll be a placard shipped with the autopilot, and that goes on the panel as part of the STC. And then what aircraft are FAA approved? So right now we have the Cessna 172, 1956, all the way up to, I believe, the T or S with no G1000. The 175s, all the 177s, all the 180s, the 182, the 1956, all the way up to the T or the S with no G1000. The Cessna 185, all models, 190, 195, LC 126, A and B. Then we have the PA-28s, all the models except for the T-tails. So we do not have the T-tails at this time. We've got all the PA-24s from the regular 24 up to the 400. And then we've got the straight wing 32 PA-32s, but no T-tails. We have all the Grumman AA5s, and there is more to come. We're working as hard as we can. We hear what you guys want loud and clear, and we're trying to get that going. So there will be more to come. I will pass it off to James, and he'll go over some pricing.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate that. Can you take me back to the safety feature slide for a second, please? Perfect. Yeah. So, folks, autopilots aren't just for IFR. I know we can focus mainly on IFR, but if you routinely fly VFR legs, 2+ hours, an autopilot like this will greatly reduce your fatigue. And plus, with these safety features, the Trio autopilot can really save your bacon. I mean, the FAA accident archives are full of mishaps that resulted in inadvertent IMC by a VFR pilot. With this Auto 180 feature, and I think, Jeff, I think you're correct. I don't know of anyone else that does this, but with a single button press, you can do a nice level standard rate turn to the left or standard rate turn to the right and get right back into VMC conditions. That's an awesome feature. And plus, if you're flying a marginal VFR, or maybe you're flying at night when there's no visible horizon, and you find yourself in an unusual attitude, you get disoriented, getting the aircraft upright is a simple button press away. That is a really, really great feature. So those two features alone, you've got the whole list here, but those two features alone are really worth the price of admission here. If you take me to the common question slide, please. So I want to touch base about the VOR ILS approaches. So first off, as everyone knows, especially the VORs are being slowly phased out. And in most airports, not all, but most airports that have an ILS also have an LPV approach that you can choose. But a lot of times, the ILS, if you're flying down to mins and the minimums are at 300 feet, the ILS is typically the best way to go. So if you have to fly a full procedure turn ILS, well, guess what? You can use the autopilot to do that procedure turn. Then right before, about a mile or 2 miles before your glide slope intercept or your final approach waypoint, you turn off the autopilot and you set the app, in this case, in the case of Bruno's panel, you set the navigator to VLOC. The Aspen CDI automatically goes to VLOC and you hand fly the ILS down. So if you have to fly an ILS, you can use the GPS, the Trio autopilot, for the full procedure turn and then just hand fly the aircraft down. Remember, just because you're going to get, when you do an IPC, you get these check rides, your check pilots aren't going to let you use the autopilot for everything. You're going to have to be able to hand fly these aircraft, even an autopilot. So if you have to fly an ILS, you can still do the full procedure turn and just hand fly it down. And there was a question in the chat room about the minimums, what you go down to. Remember, as Jeff said, the autopilot can only go down to 500 feet, but you're still getting lateral and vertical guidance from the navigator to the Aspen all the way down. So I just want to make sure, I just saw that question pop up like there was some confusion if you lost vertical guidance. You don't lose guidance. You'll have it on the Aspen from your navigator. So, okay, so let's go to the current pricing or promos. Okay, so as we talked, I think as you saw, if you signed up, you saw this big thing, the display and an autopilot for under $11,000. Where there it is, you can, if you have nothing in your panel right now, you can purchase both the E5 and Trio autopilot for $10,785, so under $11,000. That's a great starting price. These next prices below for the Aspens, this is without the autopilot. So say you already have a Trio and you want to go to a Pro Max PFD. Well, you don't need the ACU, and that's $8,245. If you want to go to a 2000 Max like Bruno's panel, that's $14,995. If you have a Legacy Pro and you're doing this, you can trade that in for $44,995. And there was a question yesterday, if you have a Legacy 2000 or Legacy 2500 system, every display has to be upgraded to a Max, because the Max won't talk to the Legacy display. So you have to upgrade all of those. If you're an existing, I'm sorry, yeah. So, and if you're also, you can also get the Trio autopilot. So if you already have an Aspen display, you can get the Trio autopilot for just under $6,000. Remember, since the Trio does not require an ACU from the Aspen, so that saves you a lot of money. And there isn't a Trio unlock. So I think that question popped up in the chat room. There isn't a specific unlock for Trio with the Max systems. They just work. The only thing that might cost you a little bit is if you have a Legacy display, or if you have an original E5, like the first 2 years of the E5, that one will have to come back, and there is a charge to upgrade that to the Pro Max hardware before we ship it out. Okay, next slide, please.
James,
Jeff, you had something here, right, with the upgrade?
Yeah, I just want to let people know the process of the software upgrade to the autopilot. The autopilot is not field loadable for a few reasons. But if you are interested in the new software for the Trio and you're not on the list, you can contact me. And if you've contacted me before, I put everybody in a spreadsheet, but feel free to email me. And your name's tied to a specific date that you'll get your RMA. If you have an annual or something going on, I'll try my best to work with you on that. I know that the PMA facility is a little bit backed up right now, but shoot me an email if you want to know exactly where you're at. But essentially the process is you ship it to us. We will update the software for $400. If it's in warranty, we'll essentially overhaul the head unit for you. If there's any button chips or anything like that going on, we'll completely tear down the unit and make it like new again. And we'll upload the new software and we'll send it back to you. It's $400 flat rate. And it's usually about a week process. So if you buy a new system, there's a place on the order form that you can check, and it says EFIS unlock. That's a $200 charge for new customers. So a 182 kit or a 172, it's $59.95 shipped with all the components. But if you have an Aspen, it's $61.95. So that's the process, and you can email me if you have any questions about how to get on the list or to make sure you're on the list to send your head unit in.
Awesome. And then along with that, if you have a Pro Max system that's running 210, 210.2, or 211 right now, the software updates from Aspen to 212 are free. We do not charge you for those. But the shop will charge you probably a half hour to an hour labor what it takes to do that. But Aspen never charges for software updates. But there is shop labor involved. Okay, so if you're interested in the Aspen or Trio combination, if you're in the Western U.S., that's Mr. Dave Wilcox. There's his contact information. Is Western U.S. and Western Canada. If you're in Northeast, Midwest, and Eastern half of Canada, that's Mr. Michael Studley, who's also working the chat room tonight. If you're in the Southeast, the United States, that's Andy Smith. There's his contact information. And then anywhere else in the world for Aspen, that's Corey Relling. And then Trio has a Trio. If you're going for a certified system, you just contact Jeff, who's talking with us tonight. And if you're just looking for an experimental system, well, that's Mr. Jerry Hansen. There's his contact information. So that wraps it up for the presentation. We'll turn it over to AJ and Mike to see if there's any questions they haven't got to yet, or if there's some questions that popped up on multiple occasions, and we'll cover. Jeff and I will cover those.
I think we covered pretty much everything. I didn't see too many repeats. There were a bunch of questions about flight director, and we do not have a plan at this time to do flight directors. I don't know if Mike saw anything else that I missed.
Just, there's some questions coming in about different aircraft models. What's the best way for customers or potential customers to get notified when new models are added to the STC?
That's a great question. I'll answer that real quick.
Go ahead.
There's a newsletter at the base of our website, the stcgroupllc.com. I put out about one thing every month or so, and that tells people, exactly what direction we're heading. And you can always call me or email me. That actually is my cell phone number right there. I pick up my phone 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day. So if you give me a call and you want to talk about something specific, or send me an email. So that's, we don't really put out a ton of news on exactly what we're doing. If you have something that's on our roadmap, I will let you know that, but we don't publish that information publicly, just because we kind of just work on stuff and then put it out as soon as we're ready. That's our model.
Some other questions here about the LPV and ILS approaches, but I think you guys covered all of those.
Yeah, I'm responding to this one. Maybe I can just do it.
Yeah, just read it out if one just came in.
Yeah. Is there a plan for it to fly analog inputs, ILS, VOR? We don't plan to have it ever fly the vertical flight path for an ILS, but currently with the Aspen, it will fly a VOR or ILS laterally. The Trio will just not get any vertical guidance. You'll have to manually do the pitch stuff or enter it in manually.
And remember, folks, if you're flying a VOR approach, the FAA does allow that you can have the GPS inputs, a GPS overlay, fly that in GPS mode, and especially in a Pro Max, we have the bearing needles. As long as you have the VOR source up, and you wouldn't be able to do this on an E5, but on a Pro Max, you can have a bearing needle up to the E5, up to the VOR, so you can fly that VOR approach in GPS, and just have the number one or number two bearing needle tuned to the VOR station you're following. So you're monitoring. You have to legally monitor that VOR station you're flying in most cases, unless it says VOR GPS. So if it just says VOR, you can still use a GPS, but you have to monitor that VOR station.
We got another question about selected course. So when you dial in a VOR or ILS, you'll have a course indication on the Aspen. And if you are unslaved and you move that back and forth, or if it slaves to it from a change from a
So the auto course in the Aspen only works in GPS mode. So if you're flying a
oh,
VOR ILS, you have to twist that course in every time manually. Is that the
oh
question?
no, selected course was for the trio.
Oh, okay, sorry.
If it Yeah, basically if that course needle moves, the trio will follow it in our course mode. Does the experimental version of the autopilot have an auto trim function? Yes, it does. The pitch servo actually outputs a up or down signal to the trim servo.
I saw there's a question about the difference between the Trio and the 3100. I mean, I guess the first biggest difference is I think that 3100 is probably 4 times the cost.
Yeah, it's a different market.
Yeah, it's a whole different market. It does have stuff like Flight Director, VNAV capability, but yeah, that's a different market. I got in a much more expensive autopilot.
Yeah.
There was a couple questions about average labor times as well for the installation. For an Aspen, it's typically in a non-pressurized aircraft, it's about 40 hours for a single screen installation. And I think AJ put in here, if correct me if I'm wrong, AJ, it's about the same for the Trio.
Uh, yeah, most models we average about 40 hours, depending on the shop. That's if they've done it before, or if you know, if it's during the annual, then you don't include taking the interior out as part of the autopilot installation costs. Some of the models, the Comanche and the Grummins, are less. We average 35 hours or less.
Yeah, I think AJ did Bruno's in 12, but the harness was in it. So it's how experienced people are. 40 is what we tell people because that's what our dealers usually charge. But keep in mind with the Aspen E5 and the Trio package, that can be purchased direct as well. And if you have a good IA or you are a large portion of our customers are IA or AMP, you can do that during annual and cut a lot of time off stuff. Even
And
with
those two 40-hour numbers, you wouldn't necessarily have to call it 80 hours because a lot of that work running cables to the tail of the aircraft, that would take some of the time away from the Aspen install as well. So, I don't want anybody to think it's an 80-hour project, but it's probably 40, probably I would guess about 60 hours total.
yeah, it's a good estimation.
Someone asked if our servos are where the old servos were in a Cessna Navimatic 172, 182. The roll servo is where the Navimatic servos were. Our pitch servo is in a new location. I think the higher end Navimatics were in a different location.
Yeah, so we try not to recreate the wheel. We try to, utilize the same locations, but sometimes, we just got capstan servos approved with the Comanche, but sometimes they won't fit in the exact same locations or with the same configuration. So, a lot of them are piggybacked off the original Cessna stuff, but I can send you installation instructions if you want to see exactly where they are.
Here's a good question that just came in. Who can install the Trio?
Contact this person here, which is myself.
I
Jeff.
mean, an IA, AMP repair station.
All the above, but an IA or greater it needs to be signed off. The 337 must be performed.
And as Mike alluded to, for the Aspen side, the E5 display is the only display that can be installed by a non-Aspen dealer. Pro Maxes have to be installed by an Aspen dealer. So if you're contemplating that, which way to go, make sure you understand what you're doing, because if you have someone else install, if you have an AMP install your Trio, and he's going to take the panel apart, spend all that time doing it, do the install, put the panel back together, and now you got to fly that aircraft to an Aspen dealer. He's going to tear that panel apart, put the Aspen in, and put it all back together. So you'll lose. You may think you're saving money if you're going that way, but make sure what package you're doing that it's allowed that person can install both pieces of equipment.
The question that's up right now is a good one that I don't know the answer to.
Well, yeah. So the ACU1 is an analog converter. So this customer must have Dave must have an analog NavCom or VLOC radio. So we use that to convert the signal to digital, so the display can handle it, and then heading it or sending that information back out over 429 to the Trio. Since the Trio is not looking for the localizer and the glide slope from an ILS, then I don't think that's going to happen.
It might if it's on the course bug.
Okay, well, so we are sending that information back out. So if you're listening for it, then it sounds like it would work.
Yeah, our selected course is literally it's a combination of two of your labels, but I'm pretty sure if it's displayed as a course bug, the Trio will see it and fly to it if the Trio's set up that way.
Okay, and so the charge for an upgrade to 2.12, if you have a Pro Max unit already, which typically run 2.10 and later software, the dealers in the field can update the software for you. They usually charge, half an hour to an hour or something like that for the paperwork and the upgrade. If this question from Oscar here is related to a legacy display being upgraded to a Pro Max. That's one that James covered on the slide earlier. That's $44.95.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions coming in. And we're just about at the top of the hour, so I want to thank everybody for attending this evening. I want to let you know that this session has been recorded and will be posted. I will send a link to a YouTube video of the recording to all registered attendees. And again, I want to thank you for joining us, and thank you, Jeff, James, Mike, and AJ, for hosting a great webinar this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Perry.
Have a good
Thank
evening.
y'all.